Topic today is utility and balance. Someone asked about classes, specifically in Project Eternity, but this could apply to a bunch of different stuff, so I figured I'd just make it a general topic. Asking about what does it mean for a class to be useful, in my view, and does that mean that they're all supposed to be equal or balanced, with balanced in quotes? Here's the thing. So whenever you're giving the player options, I think that the options that you give to the player should have clear and obvious trade-offs. Obviously, the player can't know everything that's going to happen way on down the road on their merry adventures that they're going to have. But if you give them the ability to pick a certain ability or pick a certain bonus or something, the content really needs to support that as an roughly, and viable way to play through the game. So, to pick a specific example, racial enemies or hated enemies have been a thing in D&D for a few editions now. In first edition, it was just giants and giant-y things. And then you got the ability to pick, like, oh, it's going to be orcs or undead or whatever. Now, the thing is, if you say to the person, hey, man, you can totally specialize in aboleths, either you as a DM have better be making the aboleth campaign, or if you're a CRPG designer, you should probably have a decent number of aboleths to make that investment worthwhile. How this applies to class design and almost any design where you're giving these sort of trade-offs, like you can be a wizard, you can be a rogue, you can be an elf, you can be a dwarf, you can use a longsword, you can use a longbow, is that it's our job to give the player a good reason to use those things. And if it's not obvious, then we need to make it at least, if not obvious, at least clear. Like we can't make, as designers, we can't make people want to play the game. And we shouldn't design the game for people who don't want to engage with the mechanics. But at the same time, if we present the player with something and they're actually paying attention and they're trying to play the game, even if they're not great at it, should be kind of clear what's going on and what trade-offs they're going to make. So if I pick open locks versus, read ancient poetry, or let's actually say vice versa. If I pick read ancient poetry, there's sort of an implicit trust, I think, at least as a DM in a tabletop game. If I pick read ancient poetry, hoo boy, there better be some hot times with ancient poetry coming pretty soon, because that you gave me that option as something that's an equal and valid choice. I know some people think that it's fine to not do that. And you say like, well, you picked a wrong option, a bad option. You picked an option that the content doesn't support, and then later on you find out about it, and then you go back and you make a new character, and now with the knowledge that like sort of the metagaming knowledge, oh, there's no ancient poetry in here, or like, this world doesn't even have locks, it only has ancient poetry. That's how you open containers, idiot. I don't want to design games like that. Like, that's cool if people think that is a totally fine way to design games. I just don't agree. I think that if you give options to the player, you should have enough content to support the options that you present them with, assuming that you're saying, hey, these things are equal. There is something to be said for the argument that you can present the player with options that are not equally useful, and like this is a challenge option, or whatever. I think that is okay too. I'm less opposed to that. In general, though, I'd rather say, hey, if you can play this race or this class or that class, you're going to find that your game plays differently. I think that's important. I don't think that the game should play the same depending on then it's kind of like, why have options? If your options make the game play exactly the same, then why are those options there? What I'd rather do is say like, hey, here are these options. It's going to change, some slightly, some majorly, how you're going to approach obstacles and tackle challenges, but you're going to be able to do it. And the nice thing about that is that if you do a good job making things reasonably balanced, then a player can jump in for the second, third, fourth, whatever time and say like, I'm going to make a party of all ciphers, or like I'm going to make my Svirfneblin party, or whatever the heck they want to do, and they can play it, and they might run into obstacles that are now really, really difficult, or they might run into stuff that used to be hard, but now it's incredibly easy, and that's fine and that's great. But the point is, like, I feel that when we give options, we should support them, and balance. I just gotta say, I'm really tired of seeing balanced in scare quotes. Like, it's my job. Like, it is my job to give you things that are useful. And that utility it's always subjective, but it's my job to try to make it something where it's a difficult choice for the player and a meaningful choice for the player. So when you look at these two things, like, oh, do I want to play a ranger or do I want to play a paladin? That should be, like, I don't know, like, man, I gotta let me think about this. And when you get in, you should go, I'm really glad I took a paladin for this reason, and I'm really not glad I took a paladin for this reason. Like, I'm good in these circumstances, and I stink in these circumstances. I get through everything, but the challenge changes, and the way I get through things changes. So when it comes to something like the design of a rogue, for example, traditionally in D&D, I would say prior to 3rd edition, they were just bad in combat. I mean, backstab was their one like good combat thing, but it wasn't really that good. I mean, it's really narrow application, and and because it was a multiplier, you could like roll bad base damage and like, hey, cool, times 5-1, awesome, thank you. So the idea was that, like, over time, the rogue was, or the thief was, a utility character. Like, well, he's not good in combat, but he's got all these great skills. But then, like, the system sort of inflated that number of skills, or they really had like even in 3rd edition, they had like a disproportionate number of skills that were kind of like just for the rogue to go crazy on. So, the rogue would get like huge number of skill points, but there are also a huge number of skills for the rogue to cover. And it just kind of seemed, but at the same time, they were making it more combat viable. So from my perspective, what I would rather do is say, and I know some people also disagree with this, some people would rather say, well, you should be able to make a character that is bad in combat, good at, good at non-combat things, or vice versa. Personally, I would rather have the player make choices between, how do I want to be good in combat, which is partially class, and then the customization options within class, and how do I want to be good outside of combat. And those, again, should be difficult choices. Like, it's true that the variability of characters does change when you separate those pools, meaning the combat skills are separate from the non-combat skills or abilities or whatever you call them. But you can still have a lot of variety within each category. You can still say, like, there are a lot of ways you can build a paladin. There are a lot of ways combat-wise, and there are a lot of ways you can build a paladin skill-wise. And again, like, you can have different party compositions that, work better with each other or worse with each other in certain circumstances, and that's cool. So if you want to make a party with like 4 rogues and a paladin and a ranger, great. That could be kooky, but there you go. So when I think about things like utility and balance, in any given circumstance, maybe not in the game, let's say, in the game, in combat and out of combat, a character of a given class, you should feel like, I understand the general vibe of what this class is pretty good at, and how I can kind of mold and shape that character class for a variety of roles in combat. I think if you kind of look at combat and you look at some classes and you think, yeah, like, this class is just like, it's just inferior. It's just inherently inferior. There are no situations really, other than really marginal ones, where they're useful. Like, I really wish I had a fighter, actually. Like, I wish I had any character but a rogue, or any character but a thief. I think that's where, the balance question comes in. It's not that they have to be perfectly, like, objectively, like, every player is going to look at these things and go, man, like, I don't even know what to pick. They're just so beautifully, perfectly balanced. No, that's not really my goal. My goal is that you don't just dismiss options. I think that's really it. It's like, balance to me doesn't mean that you view them all as all equal. It's that you can at least consider them all, and it's a serious consideration, and not something where you go like, never in a million years, nice try, sucker. Like, you should, if you look at a rogue or you look at a Almala, You look at whatever, look at guns, you look at energy weapons, you look at whatever the thing you're talking about is that's a choice for the player. If the answer is, I'm just going to dump that, or I'm never going to take it, I feel like as a designer, I didn't do a very good job designing it. We went through the effort to include these things, so they should be worth consideration. And I think that's what the bottom line comes down to, is that for me, balance is giving you these options, treating them all seriously myself, so that when you see them, you treat them seriously. You don't just kind of go, well, I'm going to assume that half of these, or I can sort of tell at a glance that half of these are worthless. Or you don't even trust, in the content, like, well, I have no idea if this content is actually going to be supported. Like, I don't know if there are going to be aboleths. So, and because this game kind of sells the content short when it comes to how the system and content interact, I'm just never going to take like any of these racial enemies. I'm going to play it safe. I want the player to feel like when they pick an option, it's a dialogue, whatever, that it's reinforced and it's supported. And that applies to story choices, that applies to character building choices, all that stuff. I've rambled a lot, repeated myself a few times. But I hope that answers the question. It is something I take pretty seriously. I don't think that there's a perfect state of balance for these things. It's an iterative process, but my goal is to think about it a lot up front, try out a simple implementation, see how people actually use it, and then adjust to make things more appealing. And my general approach is always to try to make things more appealing rather than to drag other things down and make them less appealing. So if nobody plays a Chanter, then we should probably make the Chanter better. If nobody ever plays an Orlan, then we should probably look at bumping the Orlans up a little bit. Hope that gives you some insight into how I view balance and utility, not just for classes, but for just stuff in general. And thanks for watching.